The sun was fully up now, another day beginning. Michael checked his watch one last time, right on schedule. He smiled, waved to a passing patrol car, and headed home. The morning ritual that had once been shattered had been reclaimed, different but stronger, just like the community itself. 6 months after the incident, Michael stood at his familiar starting point for his morning run. The early sun painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges, just as it had done that fateful day. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill his lungs, and looked down at the Rolex on his wrist. The physical bruises had long since healed, but some mornings still felt different. Sometimes his heart would beat a little faster when a police car drove by. Sometimes he'd hesitate for just a moment before starting his run. But each day he chose to run anyway. Each day was a small victory over fear. "Good morning," called a friendly voice. It was Officer Rodriguez, one of the new community liaison officers, doing her own morning patrol. She had made it her mission to know every regular jogger, every dog walker, every early morning commuter on her route. This was the new normal police officers who knew their community as neighbors, not suspects. The neighborhood had changed too, but in subtle, positive ways. Neighbors who had once just waved politely now stopped to chat. The community that had come together in crisis had stayed together in recovery. They looked out for each other with a new awareness, a deeper understanding of what it meant to be truly neighborly. At work, Michael had become an unexpected advocate for change. His financial firm had started a community investment program, funding local initiatives that brought police and residents together. His quiet strength during the incident had earned him respect, but it was his work afterward that truly made a difference. The morning running group had grown larger. People who had never run before joined, not just for exercise, but for the sense of community. Safety in numbers, some joked, but it was more than that. It was about reclaiming their streets, their mornings, their right to move freely in their own neighborhood. Mr. Thompson's coffee shop had become a sort of informal community center. Police officers would stop by during their shifts, sitting down with residents over coffee. Real conversations happened here, about fears, hopes, and the work still needed to build trust. The walls displayed photos of community events, including one of Michael's speaking at the police academy. Some mornings, Michael would pause at the spot where the incident happened. Not out of fear, but in reflection. He'd think about how a single moment had sparked so much change. The watch on his wrist caught the sunlight, and he remembered something his father had said: sometimes the most precious things carry the heaviest weight. The neighborhood kids had started a new tradition. They would wave to every jogger who passed by, and most joggers would wave back. It was a small thing, but it meant something. A recognition of belonging, of community, of the right to be there. Michael always made sure to wave back, especially to the kids. Dr. Lee had noticed changes in his morning hospital shifts. Police officers bringing in suspects would talk to them differently now, ask more questions, make fewer assumptions. The training was working, slowly but surely. "It's about seeing the person first," he would say during his community workshops. "Everything else comes after that." The local schools had embraced change too. They started a program where students learned about community policing, civil rights, and the importance of speaking up. Michael visited sometimes, sharing his story not to scare them, but to empower them. "Your voice matters," he would tell them. "Your community matters." On Saturday mornings, the running group would sometimes stop at the spot where the incident occurred. Not to dwell on the past, but to measure how far they'd come. New runners would join, and old-timers would share stories. The spot had transformed from a place of trauma to a marker of progress. Mrs. Wilson and her golden retriever still took their morning walks. Now they often stopped to chat with Officer Rodriguez or other patrol officers. Her dog had become something of a neighborhood mascot, breaking the ice between residents and police with his friendly nature. Sometimes the simplest things built the strongest bridges. The watch that had once been viewed with suspicion had become a symbol of something larger. When Michael spoke at community events, he would hold it up and say, "This watch tells two stories now, one about my parents' dreams for me, and one about our community's strength when we stand together." As Michael finished his morning run, the neighborhood was fully awake. Cars passed by, people walked their dogs, kids waited for school buses. Everything looked normal, but everything was different too. The community had learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means growing stronger together. The high school started a program where students could shadow police officers and learn about law enforcement from the inside. At the same time, officers spent time in schools, not as authority figures, but as mentors and friendly faces. These connections helped break down barriers on both sides. 2 weeks after the incident, the police chief stood before a packed community meeting at the local high school gymnasium. The wooden bleachers creaked under the weight of concerned citizens, all eyes fixed on the podium. The air felt heavy with anticipation as he cleared his throat to speak. "Today, we're announcing several important decisions," the chief began, his voice echoing through the gym. "First, Officer Bailey has been placed on immediate administrative leave pending further disciplinary action." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but the chief wasn't finished. "More importantly, we're implementing comprehensive changes to prevent similar incidents in the future." Michael sat in the front row, surrounded by his neighbors and coworkers. The Rolex still gleamed on his wrist, no longer a source of trouble, but a symbol of resilience. Mr. Thompson from the coffee shop reached over and squeezed his shoulder in support. The changes announced were substantial. The department would launch new training programs focusing on community engagement and bias prevention. Every officer would be required to spend time meeting local residents, learning about the neighborhoods they patrolled, and building real connections with community members. "We're also establishing a civilian oversight committee," the chief continued. "This committee will include members from all parts of our community." He gestured to the diverse crowd before him. "We need your voices, your perspectives, to help us serve and protect everyone equally." In the following days, the district attorney's office announced charges against Officer Bailey, not just for this incident, but for a pattern of similar behavior uncovered during the investigation. The message was clear. Accountability wasn't just about one incident, but about addressing systemic problems. The local police academy invited Michael to speak to new recruits about his experience. Standing before a class of future officers, he shared his story not with anger, but with hope for positive change. "The watch I'm wearing," he told them, holding up his wrist, "represents my parents' dreams for me. Every officer should see the humanity in the people they serve, their dreams, their families, their stories." Community leaders worked together to create new programs. The neighborhood watch groups were revamped to focus on building bridges between residents and law enforcement. Monthly community forums were established where officers and residents could share concerns and ideas in a constructive environment. Dr. Lee helped develop new guidelines for police physical restraint techniques, emphasizing safety and dignity. "We need to protect both our officers and our citizens," he explained during a training session. "Force should always be the last resort, not the first response." The local media covered the changes extensively. Television crews captured footage of officers participating in community events, playing basketball with neighborhood kids, and attending local cultural celebrations. These weren't just photo opportunities, they were part of a genuine effort to transform police-community relations. Michael's story became a catalyst for department-wide changes. New officers were paired with community mentors during their first year on the job. Veterans on the force participated in workshops led by residents who shared their experiences and perspectives. The goal was to build understanding before incidents could occur. The Civilian Oversight Committee began its work, reviewing police procedures and suggesting improvements. They created a simple system for residents to share both concerns and positive feedback about their interactions with law enforcement. Every voice mattered, every experience contributed to positive change. Officer Chen, who had shown good judgment during the incident, became an instructor for the new training programs. "Our job is to protect and serve," she reminded her colleagues. "We can't do either if we don't know and understand our community." Her words carried extra weight because she had witnessed firsthand how situations could go wrong and how they could be handled better. The watch that had triggered the incident became a teaching tool. Photos of Michael wearing it at various community events over the years were included in training materials about avoiding snap judgments. "Look at the whole picture," instructors would say. "See the person, not just what they're wearing." As weeks passed, small changes began to add up. Officers started attending neighborhood block parties not to police them, but to join them. The morning patrol officers learned regular joggers' routes and names. community members felt more comfortable approaching officers with questions or concerns. The documentation felt endless: social media posts, security footage, witness statements, medical reports. Each piece added to the growing picture of an incident that should never have happened, of a system that needed change, of a community united in seeking justice. The Internal Affairs Office buzzed with activity early the next morning. Detective Rivera sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of files and a computer screen showing multiple video angles of the incident. She rubbed her tired eyes, having spent hours reviewing community footage and officer body camera recordings. "Look at this," she said to her partner, pointing at her screen. "Not a single reported robbery in that neighborhood for the past 6 months. She pulled up another document. "And here's the timestamp from Michael's running app. Same route, same time, every morning for 3 years." The evidence was building, piece by piece. In another part of the building, Officer Bailey's service record lay open on a conference table. The investigation team had uncovered a pattern: multiple complaints about unnecessary stops, aggressive behavior, and questionable judgment calls. Each incident had been carefully documented but somehow never addressed. "We've got photos going back 5 years, one investigator said, spreading out printed images across the table. There was Michael at the neighborhood cleanup day, wearing the Rolex. Michael at a community fundraiser, same watch. His graduation photos, the moment his parents gave him the watch, all documented on social media and in local newspaper coverage." The investigation team interviewed Michael's neighbors one by one. Mrs. Wilson brought her phone, showing years of morning greeting posts on the neighborhood app. 6:15, like clockwork, she explained. "He runs past my house, waves to me and my dog. Been doing it since he moved in." Mr. Thompson from the coffee shop provided security camera footage from his store. 3 years of morning runs," he said, pointing to the familiar figure jogging past his shop window. "You can see the watch in some of these shots. It's always been his." The team discovered something else. Michael's involvement in the community went deeper than anyone realized. They'd found records of his volunteer work at the local food bank, his participation in neighborhood watch meetings, and his role in organizing community events. The watch appeared in photo after photo, a constant presence on his wrist. At the financial firm where Michael worked, his colleagues provided more evidence. "He wore that watch to his first job interview with us," his supervisor recalled during her interview. "She pulled out a photo from the company holiday party 5 years ago. There was the watch, clearly visible as Michael helped serve food to homeless veterans." The investigation uncovered more troubling details about Officer Bailey's past conduct. Previous complaints had been filed, but never properly addressed. Body camera footage from other incidents showed a pattern of rushing to judgment, of seeing threats where none existed. Local business security cameras had captured the entire morning incident from multiple angles. The investigation team watched as Michael calmly tried to explain, as neighbors came to his defense, as the situation escalated unnecessarily. The footage painted a clear picture of an officer who had lost perspective. Dr. Lee's medical report provided crucial evidence about the physical impact of the incident. Patients showed bruising consistent with excessive force, the report stated. The restraint technique used posed unnecessary risks. His professional assessment added weight to the community's concerns. The investigation team interviewed Officer Chen, who had arrived as backup. Her statement was clear and professional. "Upon arrival, I observed no threat." The subject was cooperative and had multiple community members vouching for his identity. The situation had escalated unnecessarily. As days passed, more evidence emerged. The Neighborhood Watch Group provided years of meeting minutes showing Michael's active participation. The local running club shared photos of him volunteering at charity races. Each piece of evidence reinforced what the community already knew: this was a man deeply woven into the fabric of their neighborhood. The investigation team created a timeline mapping out Michael's history in the community against Officer Bailey's record of complaints. The contrast was stark, one showing a pattern of community involvement and positive contributions, the other revealing a troubling history of snap judgments and excessive force. In the evidence room, Michael's running app data showed his consistent route, day after day, month after month. The GPS tracking matched perfectly with neighbor accounts and security camera footage. Technology had captured what human observation already confirmed. This was a man following his daily routine in his own neighborhood. The local news had picked up the story, interviewing neighbors who spoke about Michael's character. "He's the kind of neighbor we all want to have," said Mrs. Wilson, her golden retriever sitting calmly beside her. "Always ready to help, always with a kind word. What happened today? It shows we need to do better. We need to be better." The community's response sent a clear message. They would not stand by silently when one of their own was treated unjustly. The same streets that had witnessed the morning's disturbing events now saw a different scene, one of unity, support, and determination to ensure such an incident would never happen again. By late afternoon, the videos of Michael's morning arrest had spread through local social media groups like wildfire. The peaceful suburban neighborhood had transformed into a hub of activity. Neighbors gathered in small groups on their front lawns, sharing their accounts of what they'd witnessed, their voices filled with concern and determination. The local community center, usually quiet on weekdays, buzzed with activity. People from all walks of life streamed in, postal workers who delivered to Michael's house, teachers who knew him from community events, and even the teenager who mowed his lawn during summers. They all came with the same purpose, to stand up for their neighbor. "I've known him for 3 years," said Mr. Thompson, the coffee shop owner, speaking to a group of concerned residents. "Every morning like clockwork, he jogs past my shop. Always has a friendly wave, always makes time to ask about my family." His voice trembled slightly as he recalled the morning's events, the paper cup in his hand shaking. The community response grew more organized by the hour. Dr. Lee, still in his hospital scrubs after his shift, had started a digital document where neighbors could record their experiences with Michael. "He helped my mother bring in her groceries during the big storm last winter," one resident wrote. "He volunteers at the local food bank every month," added another. Inside the community center, people huddled around laptops and phones, sharing the video footage they'd captured. The images were clear. Michael, calm and composed even while being roughly handled, trying to explain about his watch, his home, his life in the neighborhood. The recording showed the truth that Officer Bailey had refused to see. "Look at how many people came forward to speak up," whispered one elderly resident to another, gesturing at the growing crowd. "That's what community means." The room hummed with conversation, with people sharing stories of their interactions with Michael, each account painting a picture of a man who had woven himself into the fabric of their neighborhood. Local business owners joined the gathering. The owner of the hardware store brought chairs for elderly residents. The neighborhood cafe provided coffee and sandwiches. What started as a response to an injustice was becoming a demonstration of community solidarity. By early evening, the community had organized a peaceful gathering outside the police station. People held handmade signs with messages like "Listen first" and "Protect our community." Michael's co-workers from the financial firm downtown had joined them, many still in their business attire, having come straight from work. "I've worked with him for 5 years," his supervisor told the gathering crowd, her voice firm and clear. "He's one of our most respected analysts. That watch. I was at his graduation party when his parents gave it to him. We all were." She held up her phone, showing a photo from that day, Michael beaming with pride, surrounded by his family. The local running group Michael belonged to arrived in their distinctive blue jerseys. "He's part of our Saturday morning crew," their leader explained to a reporter who had shown up to cover the story. "Always encourages new runners, shares training tips. That's who he is, always lifting others up." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the gathered crowd, someone started singing a gentle song of unity. Others joined in, their voices rising in harmony. The peaceful demonstration had become something more, a testament to the bonds that held their community together. Social media continued to buzz with activity. Local community groups shared positive stories about Michael. The Neighborhood Watch group posted a statement about how he had helped organize safety workshops. The local garden club remembered how he had helped plant trees in the community park last spring. Inside the police station, the evidence was mounting. Photos of Michael at community events, testimonials from neighbors, and video footage from months of his morning runs painted a clear picture. The watch that had sparked the incident appeared in countless photos, at charity events, neighborhood gatherings, and community meetings. As night fell, the crowd remained, holding battery-powered candles that dotted the darkness like stars. They shared stories, planned next steps, and supported each other. Young children asked their parents questions about what had happened, leading to gentle but important conversations about judgment and justice. The morning that had started with such peaceful routine had transformed into something that would change not just Michael's life, but the entire community's understanding of justice and prejudice. As the witnesses continued to record and protest, it was clear that this incident would not be ignored or forgotten. Everything happened in a blur. One moment, Michael was trying to explain himself, and the next, Officer Bailey grabbed his arm with unexpected force. The morning air, which had been filled with birdsong just moments earlier, now carried the shocked gasps of onlooking neighbors. "Stop resisting!" Officer Bailey shouted, though Michael wasn't resisting at all. He stood perfectly still, his professional instincts kicking in, trying to stay calm despite his racing heart. The officer's grip tightened as he twisted Michael's arm behind his back, causing him to wince in pain. "I'm not resisting," Michael said clearly, his voice steady despite his fear. "Please, you're hurting me." The words came out measured and controlled, just like when he handled difficult situations at work, but this was frighteningly different. The hard pavement pressed against his cheek as Officer Bailey forced him to the ground. The growing crowd of neighbors erupted in protests. "He lives here," someone shouted. "This is wrong," called another voice. The sound of phones recording filled the air, their cameras capturing every moment of the unfolding scene. Mrs. Wilson, still in her morning robe, was already on her phone, frantically calling the police department to report Officer Bailey's behavior. Michael could feel the rough texture of the asphalt against his face, the weight of the officer's knee pressing into his back. The morning dew had soaked through his running clothes, making him shiver despite the warming day. His precious watch, his parents' gift, dug uncomfortably into his wrist as his arms were pinned behind him. "I can't breathe properly," Michael managed to say, his voice strained but clear. "Please loosen your grip." He tried to turn his head to look at Officer Bailey, to make eye contact, to somehow make the officer see him as a human being rather than a threat. The morning sun, now higher in the sky, cast harsh shadows across the scene. Mr. Thompson from the coffee shop had moved closer, his phone steady as he recorded. "I see this man every morning," he called out firmly. "He's been running past my shop for 3 years. This is completely unnecessary." Other neighbors joined in, their voices growing louder, more insistent. Through the commotion, Michael could hear the familiar voice of Dr. Lee, his next-door neighbor, speaking firmly. "I'm a physician. You need to let him breathe properly. This kind of restraint can be dangerous." The doctor's professional authority carried weight, but Officer Bailey seemed locked in his own world of suspicion and prejudice. The sound of another police siren filled the air, backup arriving. Michael's arms had begun to tingle from the tight handcuffs, but he focused on his breathing, on staying conscious and calm. He thought about his parents, about how worried they would be if they could see him now. The watch they had given him with such pride now felt like a heavy burden. A second police car pulled up and Officer Chen, no relation to Michael, stepped out. She took in the scene. The crowd of protesting neighbors, the phones recording, and Michael pinned to the ground. Her expression shifted from professional neutrality to concern as she approached her colleague. "Bailey, what's going on here?" Officer Chen asked, her voice carrying authority. She noted the crowd of witnesses, many in bathrobes and pajamas, clearly local residents who knew the man on the ground. The situation wasn't adding up, and she could sense it. Michael remained still, his heart still pounding but his mind clear. Years of dealing with stressful situations in the financial world had taught him to stay focused, to keep breathing, to wait for the right moment. But nothing in his professional life had prepared him for this moment, for the feeling of being treated like a criminal in his own neighborhood. The morning had grown warmer, but Michael felt cold. His running clothes, damp from both dew and sweat, clung uncomfortably to his skin. The watch that had started this whole ordeal caught the sunlight, sending a brief flash across the scene, a reminder of what had triggered this nightmare. Officer Chen approached carefully, taking in the details: Michael's professional running gear, the expensive watch that matched his overall appearance, the numerous neighbors vouching for him. She could see what her colleague had missed in his rush to judgment. This was clearly a resident of the area, not a suspicious character. Through it all, Michael kept his voice steady, repeating his identity, his address, offering to show his ID. Even with his face pressed against the pavement, he maintained his dignity. The community around him had become his voice, their phones recording every moment, their presence a testament to the bonds he had built in this neighborhood. As Michael started the final stretch of his morning run, the screech of tires against asphalt shattered the peaceful morning atmosphere. A police cruiser pulled up sharply beside him, its sudden appearance causing him to stop in his tracks. Through the driver's window, Officer Thomas Bailey stared at him with an intensity that made Michael's heart skip a beat. The officer stepped out of his vehicle, his hand resting near his belt. "Stop right there," he commanded, his voice carrying across the quiet street. Several early morning commuters slowed their cars to watch the scene unfold. Michael stood still, his chest rising and falling from his run, confusion written across his face. "That's a nice watch you've got there," Officer Bailey said, taking deliberate steps forward. His eyes were fixed on Michael's wrist, where the Rolex caught the morning light. "We've had reports of a break-in 3 blocks from here. Expensive jewelry was stolen." The officer's tone left no room for friendly conversation, despite there being no actual report of such a crime. Michael's mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. Just moments ago, he'd been enjoying his regular morning routine, and now he found himself being treated like a criminal. "Officer," he began, keeping his voice steady and respectful, "I live in this neighborhood. This watch was a graduation gift from my parents." But Officer Bailey wasn't listening. He moved closer, his stance aggressive. "Put your hands where I can see them," he demanded. Neighbors began emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Wilson, who had greeted Michael earlier, stepped onto her porch, her phone already in hand. "Officer, please," Michael said, slowly raising his hands. "I can show you photos from my graduation. I can call my parents. This watch has been mine for years." His heart pounded against his ribs, but he fought to keep his voice calm and clear. Years of professional experience had taught him how to handle tense situations, but this was different. This was personal. The morning sun now illuminated the entire street, casting harsh shadows that seemed to mirror the growing tension. A small crowd had gathered, some filming with their phones, others watching with concerned expressions. Mr. Thompson, the coffee shop owner who saw Michael run past his store every morning, stepped forward to speak up. "I can't believe this is happening," a voice called from the growing crowd. "We see him jogging here every day." Another neighbor chimed in, "That's Michael Chen. He lives in the blue house on Oak Street." But Officer Bailey remained focused solely on Michael, seemingly deaf to the community's protests. The situation escalated when Officer Bailey reached for Michael's wrist, attempting to examine the watch. Michael instinctively took a step back, trying to maintain his personal space while explaining, "Sir, I have ID in my running belt. I can prove who I am and where I live." The morning birds had fallen silent, as if they too were watching the scene unfold. The only sounds were the murmurs of concerned neighbors and the distant hum of traffic. The peaceful community Michael had grown to love was transforming before his eyes into the setting of a nightmare. More neighbors appeared on the street, many of them familiar faces from community events and morning greetings. Some began recording the interaction on their phones, their expressions a mix of shock and concern. These were people who had shared meals with Michael at neighborhood barbecues, who had seen him help elderly residents with their groceries, who knew him as a valued member of their community. Michael's thoughts turned to his parents, to the day they had proudly presented him with the Rolex. How could something that represented such joy and achievement become the source of such tension? He could feel sweat beginning to form on his forehead, not from his run, but from the stress of the situation. Officer Bailey's radio crackled with static, but he ignored it, his attention fixed on what he perceived as suspicious. "You're going to need to come with me to the station," he announced, reaching for his handcuffs. The statement sent a ripple of disbelief through the gathering crowd. Time seemed to slow down as Michael stood there, his hands still raised, the morning sun now feeling uncomfortably warm on his back. The familiar streets of his neighborhood had become the stage for an unfolding drama that would test not just his own resilience, but the very bonds of the community he called home. The tension in the air was palpable as neighbors exchanged worried glances and whispered conversations. What had started as a routine morning jog was about to become something much more significant, a moment that would force their peaceful community to confront uncomfortable truths and stand up for what was right. The early morning sun painted golden streaks across the peaceful suburban streets as Michael Chen laced up his running shoes. At 34, he had built a comfortable life for himself, a successful career as a financial analyst, a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood, and most importantly, a sense of belonging in the community he called home for the past 3 years. That morning started like any other. Michael rolled out of bed at 5:30 a.m., his muscles already anticipating the familiar routine. He smiled as he caught sight of the Rolex gleaming on his nightstand, a precious graduation gift from his parents that represented years of their hard work and sacrifice. The watch had become more than just a timepiece. It was a daily reminder of his family's journey and their unwavering support. As he stepped outside, the crisp morning air filled his lungs. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the gentle rustling of leaves and distant chirping of early birds. A few porch lights still glowed in the pre-dawn darkness, and the occasional light flickered on as other early risers began their day. Michael checked his watch. 6:00 a.m., right on schedule. His running route was a well-worn path in his mind, down Oak Avenue, past the local coffee shop where elderly Mr. Thompson was already setting up for the day, around the community park, where he often exchanged friendly waves with other joggers. The rhythm of his feet hitting the pavement matched his steady breathing, creating a peaceful meditation that helped him prepare for the day ahead. As he rounded the corner near the park, Michael spotted his neighbor Mrs. Wilson walking her golden retriever. They had developed a friendly morning ritual over the years. She would smile and wave, and her dog would wag its tail excitedly. Today was no different. "Beautiful morning for a run," she called out as he passed. Michael waved back, his Rolex catching the early sunlight. The neighborhood had changed significantly since Michael first moved in. What started as polite nods from neighbors had evolved into genuine friendships. He was a regular at community barbecues, had joined the local running club, and even helped organize the annual neighborhood cleanup day. His morning jogs had become more than exercise. They were a reminder of how far he'd come and the community he'd become part of. As he approached the halfway point of his route, Michael paused to check his heart rate and take a sip of water. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across manicured lawns and bringing the neighborhood to life. He watched as people began their morning commutes, kids waited for school buses, and dog walkers emerged for their morning routines. The familiar weight of the Rolex on his wrist brought back memories of his graduation day. He could still see his parents' proud faces as they presented him with the watch, could still hear his mother's voice. "This is for all the times you didn't give up." The watch represented more than luxury. It was a symbol of perseverance, of dreams achieved through hard work and determination. As Michael continued his run, he mentally prepared for the day ahead. He had an important presentation at work, a lunch meeting with clients, and plans to help his elderly neighbor with her grocery shopping in the evening. This was his life now, a tapestry woven from professional success, community connections, and simple daily pleasures like these morning runs. The familiar surroundings, the crisp morning air, and the steady rhythm of his feet created a sense of peace that Michael had come to cherish. Little did he know that this ordinary morning was about to take an extraordinary turn, one that would challenge not just his sense of security, but the very fabric of his community. The neighborhood was fully awake now, with more people emerging from their homes to start their days. Michael checked his watch one last time. He was making good time, right on schedule to complete his run and prepare for work. The Rolex caught the sunlight again, a simple reminder of how far he'd come, unaware that this same symbol of success was about to become the center of a life-changing confrontation. The morning breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming flowers, masking any hint of the tension that was about to unfold. As Michael rounded the final corner of his regular route, he felt strong, centered, and ready for whatever the day might bring, or at least, that's what he thought.